Today I'm excited to show you my simple two-step formula that will help you to figure out pretty much any rhythm and how to count it. I will teach you some of the most common time signatures and some of the most commonly misunderstood time signatures like the 6/8 and the 2/2 or cut time. And I'll show you how to apply my formula with real music examples. Hi, I'm Heather from Briante Piano Duo. Odd-looking rhythms and time signatures can be intimidating and even prevent us from trying new music. But honestly, if you understand what the top number and the bottom number mean of the time signature and a little about note values, you can figure out most rhythms. So don't let a 12/8 or a 3/8 scare you away. You're going to usually see a 2, 4, or an 8 on the bottom of the time signature, and I'm going to clarify what those numbers mean today. Most people understand that the top number of the time signature tells us how many counts there are in each measure, but many are unclear about the bottom number, and that's so important to understanding rhythms. The bottom number tells us what kind of note gets one count. So note values can change depending on what number is on the bottom. So for example, here, the quarter notes are receiving 1 beat each, and here they're receiving 2, and here they're receiving a half each. Let me explain this a little more with some real music examples. This piece has a very common time signature. The C stands for 4/4 or common time. The top number tells us that there's 4 beats per measure. And remember that the bottom number tells us what kind of note gets one count. The 4 stands for a quarter note. So in this piece, the quarter note receives 1 count. So scanning the music, I see a bunch of quarter notes here. So each of those receive 1 beat. So if we know that the quarter note receives 1 beat, then we can figure out how many beats the other notes get with this rhythm tree. So half notes get 2, whole notes get 4, the eighth notes get a half each, and the 16ths get a fourth each. I recommend writing the counts into any measures that look difficult as a first step to understanding the rhythm. Now here's where my rhythm formula comes into play. Step 1 is to use the top number of the time signature and write that many beats in each measure. So if I wanted to write in the counts into a few measures, I would just be taking that top number 4 and figuring out where the 4 beats go in each measure. Now, if step 1 isn't helpful and you're struggling figuring out where the beats go, then you can try step 2. Step 2 is counting for the kind of note that you see the most. So in this piece, I see mostly eighth notes. So how do we count for eighth notes? I recommend counting in ands like this: 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. That way you're saying something for each eighth note. And I recommend being consistent with your counting. So don't start counting 1, 2, 3, 4 here and then suddenly start doing ands here, because then it's really hard to stay even and steady. If you're learning something from this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. And consider subscribing if you'd like to do more piano lesson videos with my mom and I on this channel. Now that we've talked a little bit about how to count for eighth notes, let's talk about how to count for 16th notes. In this piece, the top number tells us that there are 2 beats per measure, and the bottom number is a 4 again. So we know that the quarter note receives 1 count. So if I use step 1 here, it's pretty easy to figure out where the 2 beats go per measure, because the left hand has this steady, consistent quarter note rhythm. But if I get to this part of the piece, it's a little harder to figure out where the 2 beats go. So you can use step 2, which is to count for the kind of note that you see the most of. So scanning this piece, I see mostly 16th notes. How do we count for 16th notes if they get a fourth of a count each? How do you count a fourth of a count in music? I recommend counting like this: 1, E, and A. That way you're saying something for each 16th note. And then these eighth notes get a half of a count each. Now let's talk about the 6/8 time signature. A lot of people are really confused about what the time signature means if there's an 8 on the bottom. So in this piece, the top number tells us that there are 6 beats per measure, And the bottom number, remember, tells us what kind of note gets one count. So the 8 stands for an eighth note. So that means that the eighth note is getting one count in this piece. If we know that the eighth notes are receiving one count, then we can figure out the other note values. So the quarters are getting 2, the half notes are getting 4, and the whole notes are getting 8, and the 16ths are going to get a half each. So using step 1 of my rhythm formula in this piece is easy because you can see a lot of eighth notes, so it's easy to figure out where the 6 beats fall. So you don't really need to do step 2 here. Here's another time signature that's often misunderstood. The C with a line through it means cut time or 2-2. So the top number tells us that there are 2 beats per measure, and the bottom number tells us what kind of note gets one count. So in this, the 2 stands for a half note, and that means that the half note gets one count. So the whole notes are going to get 2 beats, the quarter notes are going to get a half each, the eighth notes are getting a quarter each, and then the 16ths are getting an eighth of a count each. So try to remember, in cut time, all the note values are cut in half from a regular common time signature 4/4. If we use step 1 of my rhythm formula, it may be a little difficult to count for the top number of the time signature. It may be difficult to figure out where the 2 beats fall in each measure. So try step 2 and count for the kind of note that you see the most of. So I see mostly eighth notes in this piece. So we know that the eighth notes are receiving a fourth of a count each. So we would want to count 1 E and a, 2 E and a. This piece also has a lot of quarter notes, so you could choose to count for quarter notes instead of eighth notes. So we know that the half note gets one count, so that means that the quarter notes are receiving a half of a count each. So how do we count for quarter notes so that we say something for each quarter note? You would count 1 and 2 and these line up like this. So you could count for quarter notes, and that's a little easier to count that way. It's not such a mouthful. 1 E and 2 E and is kind of a mouthful. Now that you understand time signatures and how to count for the most common rhythms, I have to warn you, just because you understand how to count doesn't mean that you're going to play the rhythm correctly. So make sure to watch this next video about my favorite metronome app that will help you to play rhythms accurately.